Hey, you're taking away my property.
He has every right to be out here engaging in speech. He has every right to be out here engaging in speech.
Welcome back to Spare No Arrows. I have a very special guest with us today, Marcus Schroeder. He is a 19-year-old from Wisconsin who was recently arrested just a couple weeks ago for reading the Bible outside of a public drag queen event in a public space. He's a student at the Institute of Public Theology. He wants to go into pastoral ministry at some point in the future. And currently at the event, he was with an organization of local believers called the Warriors for Christ, where they do street preaching and reading the Bible at events like this. So welcome on to the show, Marcus.
Thank you for having me.
So first, tell us kind of what event were you at and what surrounded the arrest? Yeah,
we were at a drag queen story hour, which more and more the last 2 years have been less of story hours and more dance hours. And so they were doing a dance hour with the kids and the drag queens, and there was a field in between. It was a public park that this was being hosted at, and so there's a field between me and the drag queen dancers, and I was outside the fence because they had a fenced-in area that they had a permit for to host the event there, which, if I remember correctly, was that permit was approved by the mayor. So the mayor of the city, you could say, is the one to blame for allowing this to go on. And then I was outside that fence on the public sidewalk, and that's where I started to preach. And the beginning of the video, the video that's been played online and on social media and all those different platforms, the beginning of the video was actually the beginning of me preaching. That was the beginning of our interaction with the police. So you see on that video, in that span of 2 minutes, our entire interaction with the police, our entire moments of preaching. That was our first time using amplification all day. And so as soon as I turn on that amplification, as you see in the video, like in a matter of like 5 seconds, I had like 5 police around me, and one just comes up and starts ripping the microphone from me. And which is interesting, especially since it was our first time using amplification. We were just asking, is there a law I've broken, an ordinance I've broken? We were asking him why he's just coming up and starting to seize property, do an undue seizure of property, of my property, without any explanation. And so he didn't really explain himself in any way. He just said this was the same speaker as before in the video, which what he was referring to was earlier that day, one of our guys was holding that speaker and carrying it into the fenced-in area. He was just kind of walking around in there because it was still a public event, so we were allowed to go in. So he was just walking in there. He didn't have the speaker on. He wasn't using it. He was just holding it. And one of the officers came up and told him he can't use the speaker in there. He can't have the speaker in there because they had a permit for inside that fence. So the officer told him, all you need to do is take it outside the fence, which is what he did. And then a few hours later, when I started preaching on the speaker, I was outside the fence. And so that was the only interaction that I was aware of in regards to that speaker beforehand. And so the officer didn't explain himself any more than that. And then all of a sudden, another officer behind me just grabbed my arm, started kind of twisting behind my back and handcuffed me. And then they walked me off and arrested me. I was just questioning them. Why am I being arrested? What exactly are you holding me for? And at first he told me resisting arrest, which obviously doesn't make sense. What's the original reason I'm being arrested? And
yeah, you can't be arrested for resisting arrest. There has to be a reason for the arrest in the first place for you to resist, right?
Right. Yes, exactly. And so he eventually told me that what I'm being charged with is amplification without a permit and resisting arrest, which again, okay, forget the resisting arrest charge. That means that you're arresting me for amplification without a permit, without ever telling me to turn it off, without ever, that's a citation. You look at the very most of the citation.
Sure.
And so, and then also the resisting arrest charge is a charge where it's like, you watch the video, I didn't resist the arrest at all. I asked the officer who handcuffed me why I was being charged with that. He said, because my muscles tensed up. So, so obviously you can see there, and I've talked to other people too who have face similar situations with hostile officers who clearly have a personal bias against us. And they said, you know, some older guys in our group and some that I've known said that there were times years ago when they would get arrested by the officers, and the officers would literally be going through the law books trying to find a law to charge them with. And so,
Yeah.
so that's a little bit of what took place there. Even with the amplification without a permit, I didn't have a permit, but first of all, they didn't check with me. They didn't ask. They just
Yeah.
come up and stripping the mic from me. So for all they know, I very well could have had a permit, but they didn't check. And then the amplification without a permit, if you actually look at it on my actual citation, I'm charged with music without a permit. And so when you look at the actual ordinance, it's an ordinance about music. And the reason why is because the Supreme Court has ruled that those amplification, those ordinances that restrict amplification cannot restrict amplification in that way for two protected classes of speech, and that is political speech and religious speech, which
Interesting.
mine would classify as both. And
Yep.
so what that ordinance is actually about is, let's say I want to host a rock concert or have some sort of band come to and I was going to use amplification. A week beforehand, I would need a permit in order to have that. That's why on my actual ordinance, it's music without a permit, which isn't, or amplified music without a permit, which isn't something. I wasn't playing any music. I was preaching. And so the Supreme Court has ruled that essentially the right to free speech implies the right to be heard. So we have the right to free speech means we have a right to amplification. And so the only thing, like the Supreme Court has ruled that the only thing that they can actually legally restrict me on in regards to amplification when it comes to those two protected classes of speech is time, place, or manner. So time, like if it's 1 a.m, place, it's like right outside somebody's house, and manner, it's turned up all the way. 1 a.m, outside somebody's house, turned up all the way. Even if it's political speech, they have the right to stop that, right? But
Yep.
on a public sidewalk at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, during the middle of a public event that we are allowed to protest at in a public park, with the speaker not turned up all the way, the speaker wasn't even that loud, it wasn't even disrupting their event. With that as a circumstance, they have no basis upon which to even charge me with a citation, let alone arrest me. Like they not only did they have no basis to arrest me, they had no basis to charge me with a citation. They had no basis to even tell me that I could stop. Like they can't take that speaker from me. There's no, like I had the constitutional right to continue to do exactly what I was doing, and they had no legal authority to stop me.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and watching the video, you're asking them questions. You know, he's trying to rip the microphone out of your hand, and you're not letting him, you know, because he can't do that. You can't just rip a microphone out of somebody's hand. You can't take somebody's property, even if you're a police officer. That's illegal. That's stealing, right? And but you know, once
we kind of had a revolution about undue seizures.
yeah, yeah, that's interesting. But once they actually started handcuffing you and taking you away, you immediately became very compliant and respectful. And you were respectful the whole time. You were just asking them questions like you should, like why are you doing this? What, you know, what's happening here? You know, what reason do you have for doing this? So obviously there was some kind of bias here. At the actual drag queen event, and it's weird to say that it was a story hour with all those dancers and whatever, but was, you know, and obviously a drag queen, anything is objectionable, but was it just weird, or was there anything actually explicit happening at the event?
Oh no,
or illegal?
They were grown men, literally dressed in women's lingerie, gyrating in front of 3, 4, 5, 6-year-old kids.
And they
That
were just wearing lingerie.
Yeah, so, some of them were more clothed than others. Others
Yeah.
were wearing lingerie. You know, like we've got some video footage of the different. So some of them are just walking around, literally doing like it was like it was really run like a strip show. The children were giving dollar bills. They were encouraged
Yeah.
to give dollar bills to the drag queens as the drag queens were going around dancing in front of the kids. It was literally being run like a strip show with grown men dressed in this manner. And so we actually brought to the chief of police, one of our guys in our group brought to the chief of police, try to file a complaint about what the drag queens were doing, because there's a law on the book, statute 948.055, that
Mhm.
very clearly outlaws the exposing children to any sexually suggestive or sexually suggestive material. And so we brought that law to the officer's attention. One of our guys tried filing a complaint with the chief of police about what the drag queens were doing. And the chief of police told him he's not allowed to file a complaint because those aren't his kids, which of course is complete nonsense. If you see a child in the middle of the street being molested, you have every right to file a complaint with the police.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right. So it's like, it's complete ludicrous to say you can't file a complaint because those aren't your kids. But yeah, we brought, I think pretty much everybody in our group had that law. We showed it to them. We read it for them. We brought it to like pretty much every officer's attention we could, to the sergeant who was there. That was actually a sergeant who was ripping the microphone out of my hand. And so we brought it before the attention of the sergeants. There was state troopers there. We brought it before the chief of police. We brought it to like everybody's attention that we could. Said, you need to stop what's going on. You can see what's taking place at this event, and it's very clearly a sexually charged, a sexually suggestive event being done for little kids.
Yeah.
And of course, they didn't do anything about it. And in fact, what they did was they targeted our group instead.
So what's your theory behind why they did that? Why was there this bias? And clearly something actually evil, if not obviously illegal, was happening. It could be argued if it was illegal or not, but clearly that was a lot worse than what you were doing, which you just started reading the Bible, and what you were reading was from Romans. It wasn't even a passage about homosexuality or anything like that. It was about love.
Right. Well, Galatians 5 actually was the passage. Yeah. But right, yeah, what you said wasn't about homosexuality. It was just about true love fulfills the law, keep the law through love, serve one another. Because and the reason I was reading from that is because that word love gets thrown around a lot in that group. Love is love. If you stand against us, you're haters. Why would you try to restrict somebody's right to love? And so, you just have to ask the question, what is love? And, scripture in many different places, all throughout scripture, defines what true love is. Romans 12, let love be without hypocrisy, hate what is evil, cling to what is good. 1 Corinthians 13, we actually have a sign that just has this verse on it. It says, love does not rejoice in evil, but rejoices in the truth. And so, true love is really the exact opposite of what they're promoting as love.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I was reading from. I forget what your original question was. Sorry.
No, that's okay. Yeah. Why would they have targeted you for this? You weren't those kinds of street preachers that were screaming or causing any kind of ruckus. You were very calmly reading with an amplification device from Galatians, and you had just started. Why would they think that you're more dangerous than the homosexuals who are trying to corrupt children?
Right. I think I don't know their hearts. I don't know the motives behind why they were doing what they were doing, but I guess we can guess. And throughout that day, I feel like a lot of them definitely seemed to like we were being pretty forward with the police officers. You need to uphold this law. Yeah. And we were being respectful. But we were also saying, hey, look, if you don't uphold this law, you are failing your job. You're failing to do, like, you've literally lost any sense of what it even means to be a man, to protect innocent children from being molested. That's part of masculinity, is to protect the innocent in your community. And so, we were letting them know, like, you need to uphold this law. And many of them definitely had their consciences pricked, and many of them were starting to argue with us and trying to defend themselves, and things like that. And so that's not typically something that they will do if they're just there to uphold the law, right? Typically.
What kinds of things were they saying when they were trying to defend themselves?
The sergeant who actually took the mic from my hand when we went to like this little police tent that they had, and then like this closed-in building at the park. Him and I probably talked for, I don't know, maybe 10 minutes.
And this
Maybe
was before or after you were arrested?
this was after I was arrested. So I'm sitting there
Okay.
in handcuffs in this chair talking to him, and you know, he was just apparently he's a professing Christian. I found out he goes to, I think, a Christian. I'm not sure if it's a Baptist church, but he goes to some sort of Christian church in the area. And but what he was telling me was essentially that if we were hosting an event at the park, we wouldn't want a bunch of protesters coming out and protesting our event. We wouldn't want them disrupting this. We wouldn't want um you know, like he was
Yeah.
essentially arguing
But it
that we
doesn't
can't be there
matter. It
protesting.
doesn't matter what you want. It matters what's legal or illegal to do.
Right.
Uh,
Yeah. And not
But
only that, but like, okay, if our group rented the park, to be honest, like we'd probably be playing volleyball. You know,
yeah,
we wouldn't be gyrating in front of children in lingerie. That is something
yeah,
that is not only according to man's law in Wisconsin objectively illegal, but it's also according to God's law objectively wrong. It's like this is something that's immoral that's taking place. So yeah, I mean, but honestly, if we were playing volleyball in a park and we had a bunch of protesters come and protest us because of who we are, we'd probably go over there and start talking to them. You know,
yeah,
like yeah, but like honestly, it wouldn't bother me. Um, but yeah, so he's making these arguments. He's telling me that he has to just uphold the law, that he has no other choice. I'm like, you do have to uphold the law, but you know, here's what the law is. And of
yeah,
course they were saying that, well, in our, you know, like what they're wearing is like about the same as a lot of swimsuits. Like you go to the beach and you'll see a lot of people dressed in the same, like they're showing the same amount of their body as someone on the beaches. So you know, why is this wrong? But you're not telling us to arrest people at the beach. But obviously, I'd say there's a clear difference when you're dressed in that and you're dancing in sexual ways in front of children and having them hand you dollar bills. I
yeah,
think that's something different than just being at the beach in a swimsuit, right?
yeah.
Um, but yeah, that was some of the arguments that they were arguing was, you know, that this is just this is just you know, no worse than someone at a beach in a swimsuit.
Yeah, that's like saying somebody involved in a drug deal. It's like they're doing exactly the same thing that they do at the grocery store. They're just buying and selling things. It matters what the thing that they're buying and selling. In this case, it matters the context of what they're doing. The problem is not what they're wearing, but the problem is what they're wearing and the things that they're doing and to whom they're doing it. Children.
Right. And the places in which they're doing it. Right.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So
So what I'm curious. Not a lot of young men are like you, willing to do something like this in the first place. Even young Christian men. And so I'm really curious, what got you to the point, as in like upbringing or church experience or the school you go to, what brought you to this point to not only want to street preach or read the Bible at these events. Not only are you street preaching, but you're specifically going to these events where they hate you, and and then being willing to be arrested. What brought you to that point?
yeah, I think you can maybe categorize this into two different areas. One is practically my life experience that brought me here, and then also theologically my beliefs on why we should be where we're at. And so I guess start like practically my life experience, what brought me here. I was raised in a Christian household. I was saved when I was 4. I right away was pretty passionate about the gospel. I was like 4 years old, handing out tracts to everybody. That kind of faded away for most of my life until I turned about 14. And then there was kind of a series of things that happened in my life when I was 14, 15 that just woke me up to the Holocaust of abortion. And then I get involved with a ministry called Operation Save America. And um, Jason Storms is the national director of that. He's actually one of my pastors now. And him and I are good friends. He's a bit of a mentor to me. And so those kinds of older men in groups like Operation Save America, and then also the church that I go to now, Mercy Seat Christian Church. Those kind of men are there kind of discipling the younger men, teaching them what it looks like to go to the hottest place of the battle. And so, yeah, the Operation Save America thing was like a 1 week event that was on abortion. And so they did training sessions where they would teach us, okay, here's how you respond to arguments on abortion. And they went through all the different pro-choice arguments, and here's the best responses to them. And here's how you ask someone questions to make them think about their own worldview and their own perspective. Because a lot of the times these people are taught things in the public school, sorry, and they're told these things from others, but they don't really take a lot of time to think through them themselves. And sometimes just a few questions put in the right spot is all it takes to completely devastate someone's worldview and make them start rethinking all of life. And so, they were teaching us some of that. And then in the afternoons, we'd actually go out and do it. And so they would take us to the abortion clinic. We would be pleading with mothers going in. They would take us out to just the streets with random passerbys, have us walk up to random people and start up these conversations, do interviews with them, things like that. And then in the evening, we would do these rallies, these night rallies, where we'd have these guys speak, and then we would do prayer and worship. And they still do this. So this is like the format. They do a national event every year. We just did one in Georgia that I was at. And so they have a different place that they go to every year. But yeah, OperationSaveAmerica.org is where they put that up. But that's the format. Is like a lot of these Christians have conferences about like what's wrong with our culture, and sometimes they'll even talk about what are some things we can do to fix it, but they won't actually do anything practically to apply what's taught at the conference. And so that's something I've appreciated about OSA, Operation Save America, is the way that they would practically apply that. So that 1 week really just completely turned my life around, completely transformed my life. I was like 15, I think. Yeah, it was the summer. I was 15, and from there I just started doing this kind of ministry, and haven't really looked back, I guess. So that's I guess the practical, my life experience, what brought me here. And obviously I still have those older men in my life, and I go out and do that kind of thing with them and with my church and whatnot.
You still go out and do those events with your church?
Yes.
That's great.
Yeah. And both my pastors have been doing this for decades.
Awesome.
Outside abortion clinics, drug queen story hours, pride events, all those kinds of things. But with that, I think theologically, some of the reasons why we should be doing this is some people are going to ask, okay, what's the effectiveness of this? Why would we go out there and do it? I'd say if it's not effective, then we wouldn't be here as Christians today, because the Apostle Paul, the apostles, the way that they did this was the very way that we're doing it. Obviously, we do it imperfectly, but they were going out to these places of idol worship in the culture. They were going to the public square. They would come into town. They would go to the synagogues and openly debate with the Jews the things in the scriptures containing to the Messiah. They would talk about these things in the public square, in the public sphere. They didn't set up a church building and then go out and pass out a bunch of flyers and say, hey, come to our youth group tonight. We're going to have games and pizza and all this fun. That wasn't their method of evangelism. Their method of evangelism was going to the hardest places in the culture, before the magistrates, before people who wanted to kill them, before idol worshipers. In Ephesus, Acts 19, they go to Ephesus, they burn their magic books in the middle of the city, which, by the way, like historically speaking, Ephesus was the center of magic in the Roman world. It was like the city was entirely based upon magic. That's what a lot of their economy was based upon. It was a very tightly held, it was something that they held to very close to in their culture, in their community. In many ways, it would be like a group of homosexuals being converted, coming to Christ, and then going to the middle of Madison or Los Angeles and burning a pride flag, right? Yeah. And so that's what they did. They burn these magic books, and literally what happens right after that is a riot breaks out. And there's like this little verse in there that I love, where it's like the riot breaks out. They're all running to the temple of Diana, yelling these chants, trying to talking about killing the apostles, which is what you could expect. Like, imagine if we were to do that in Los Angeles, that's what you would expect, right? And
Oh
so
yeah, absolutely.
that's what happens. And there's like this little verse that talks about the Apostle Paul is trying to go in there to preach to them, and the rest of the Christians hold him back and are like, now's not the time, for his own safety. And so,
Yeah.
but that was like the heart of the Apostle Paul. He sees the riot, he's like, oh, opportunity for the gospel. And so, that was the ministry that they were doing. That's the ministry that the prophets were doing. And so that's the ministry that missionaries throughout all of history have done. They've gone to like cannibalistic cultures, and they've stood in between the cannibals and their intended victim, and they've preached the gospel and physically stopped them from practicing cannibalism. They've gone
Yeah.
to like Amy Carmichael went to India and started rescuing little girls from temple prostitution, and William Carey went to India too and rescued babies from child sacrifice, and that those were the kinds of things that Christians were doing throughout all of history, was applying the gospel not just to the individual. It's not just a message of how you can individually get to go to heaven one day. It's a message of God reconciling all of creation to himself. And so that includes these cultural arenas. And so if we believe that Christ is king, and Matthew 28, Great Commission starts with Christ saying, I have all authority in heaven and on earth, then
Yeah.
there is no realm where we shouldn't be going and saying, look, there's a new king in town, and we are required to obey his commands. We're called to disciple the nations, baptize them, teach them to obey all that Christ has commanded. So like we have to ask ourselves, are education systems a part of the nations? Is the civil government, the civil magistrate a part of the nations? Are families a part of the nations? Churches, are they a part of the nations? Businesses, individuals, like it's not just the individual, it starts there, but it's the entire nation that ought to be discipled and taught to obey all Christ has commanded. So I'd say that those are probably some of the theological foundation that we come off of to say, this is why we need to be engaged in these areas.
That's awesome. I totally agree. That sounds very Christian nationalist of you. And I'm not sure what you think about the phrase, but after saying what you said, I would love to hear what you think. And also knowing that a lot of people in the spheres that you come from, like the founders ministry type people, a lot of people like say Vodi Bakum are totally fine with the word Christian nationalism defined a certain way. And other people are really, really uncomfortable with it. And so I want to hear your opinion.
Yeah. Christian nationalism is interesting because it's not super well defined. I think it started as kind of a slur against that kind of Christianity, if I
Yeah,
remember correctly. And so,
absolutely.
and then a lot of Christians are like, hey, that's not actually that bad. Let's adopt it. And
Yeah,
so I don't have any problem necessarily with adopting it. Um, but I do see some Christians' hesitancies to quickly adopt it as well, because what I tell people is I'm not just working for Christian nationalism as in America kind of nationalism, but like I'm working for a Christian world. But
yeah,
obviously a Christian world is going to be made up of Christian individual nations. And so yeah, I usually ask people who are against the idea of Christian nationalism, because they say, and just for sake of the conversation, I think it might be helpful to, at a very basic level, just say Christian nationalism is an idea that the nation and the government ought to be based off of a Christian morality and obeying Christ.
sure.
I think there are a lot of differences and different camps that can fall under that. But I think
Yep.
at a very basic level, Christian nationalism is the government has to obey Christ.
Yeah. And I think you're right. I think that's even what the bad guys say. And they accuse us of. They accuse Christians of, well, you're Christian nationalist because you think you want to convert the nation. We're like, yeah,
Yeah.
that's exactly what we want.
Right. Yeah. So if that's how you define Christian nationalism, yeah, absolutely. Amen. I'm down with that. And then Christians who have a problem with that, because I've met many Christians who are like, no, the gospel is just about, getting individuals saved, and we're not supposed to force our religion upon others. That would be bad to force. Jesus wouldn't want us to do that. I usually ask them, I'd say, because almost always they say Jesus wouldn't want us to do that. Forcing our religion upon others isn't Christ-like. Jesus wouldn't want our government to be run that way. I just pause for a moment. I'm like, so you're saying that we shouldn't have Christian nationalism because Jesus wouldn't want our government to be run that way? And they're like, yeah. And say, okay, so the government has to be run the way that Jesus wants. And they say, yeah. I'm like, okay, then you're a Christian nationalist.
Yeah.
We just might disagree on what Jesus actually wants the government to be run like, but we both agree at the foundation that whatever Jesus wants, once we figure out, okay, we can ask that question, what does Jesus want for the government? And we can have a debate about that. But once we figure that out, that's what the government ought to do, whatever Jesus wants.
Yeah.
And if that's the very basic assumption, then I don't see how you could be a Christian and not hold to at least some sort of form of Christian nationalism, or at least some sort of form of, yeah, Christ is king. He has all authority. The government has to obey him as sovereign over all.
That's good. And it seems like you're living this out. And it seems like a consistent Christian has to live this out, where if they believe that Jesus is Lord, all of these things follow, where, well, like, therefore, you're going to have Jesus Lord not only over your individual heart, but over your family and over your church and over even the drag queen story hours and over the law and over the nation. And people like you are, playing that theology out consistently and actually preaching to these people and holding the lawgivers and the enforcers of the law, the police, accountable to the good laws that they're actually supposed to uphold. Right.
Right. Yes.
Man. So what, we talked a little bit about this off air, but I'm really interested in the response that you've gotten. You said you've really received a lot of messages from Christians. I'm curious what the Christian response has been and the secular response, if you've gotten much secular response.
Yeah, secular response. I've gotten a lot of messages of support, and not all of them say, I'm Christian. So I'm not sure who all out of these messages are Christian or not. But I haven't had any who are like, yeah, I'm not a Christian, but good job, as
Right.
far as I'm concerned. So I'm not
Sure.
I'm not sure if I've had a distinct secular response.
Okay.
If I have, it's been more of like a conservative, maybe like Republican.
I'm curious about the pushback, like if you've gotten any pushback from Christians and the encouragement you've gotten from Christians, and presumably if you receive pushback from non-Christians, then I'm interested about that too.
Yeah, I've received, I think I mentioned this to you, but I've received hundreds of personal messages in the last week and a half, and not a single one has been pushback. Not a single one has been against
That's
me.
amazing.
And many of those are Watertown residents. Many of them are saying, yeah, let us know next time you come to our city. You're always welcome back. Let us know next time you're coming. We're going to be there to stand with you. And so the amount of messages I've received like that, I would argue that if they want to host that event next year and it's not legally stopped by the city council, the mayor, then their political careers are not going to last very long. We've shined enough light upon this that I think there are enough people in Watertown worked up about this issue. The only problem is we find a lot of times Christians like to get upset about these kinds of things, talk about them at their Bible studies, and then just never do anything about it. Never actually go up and do the hard work of actually being engaged. So like, if this were to continue, the only way this would be allowed to continue is if the Christians continue to remain silent. And so, my prayer with the way that this has shined light upon this issue, that's what's going on in their own town. A lot of these Watertown residents didn't even know that such an event was going to take place in their town. Now that we've kind of shined a lot of light upon this issue, that's the time for the Christians to take, and if the Christians actually take that action, there's nothing that can be done to stop the amount of, because of the way our government's still run. It's a government by the people, for the people. And so with that, it's like the other side doesn't stand a chance because they are the majority in Watertown. We are the majority in Watertown. The only way that they still stand a chance to be able to continue to pervert the minds of innocent children is if good men do nothing. But yeah, with the messages, I've received immense amount of support. The only pushback I've seen, so like I said, not a single private message has had pushback. I've seen some pushback on like some Facebook comments and things like that. But honestly, I've been so busy last week and a half, and so I haven't responded to any of them. I don't. Most of them I don't even read, but a lot of the messages of support I don't have time to read either. But but yeah, I've seen some arguments that have taken place over social media where there are a couple people on my side, a couple people on the drag queen side, and they're going back and forth. And but yeah,
Sure.
I haven't seen really much pushback other than a few comments online.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Of course, those comments online and the arguments are going to happen, but it is really interesting to me that you have not personally received a lot of pushback, and that's, I think, an amazing sign that you've received so much support. People going out of their way from that town to support you is
Mhm.
astonishing, and and it seems like you have shed light if that's what's happening on these events. And like, let's say it does happen again next year, you send out a message to all those people saying, come join me, and then all of a sudden you have 100 or 200 people there,
Well,
instead
what's
of
funny is
a handful.
we actually outnumbered. We had 200 people there this time. 200.
Oh,
So not specifically from our group, but there were 200 protesters there that day.
interesting.
There were different Christian churches out there that day. There were a few pastors out there that day. There was my Warriors for Christ group, our church, um, and the people associated with me in my community. We were all out there. There were some secular groups out there too, like Gays Against Groomers. They were out there. So
Hmm.
it's been estimated about 200 protesters were actually there that day. We'd probably say like 150, maybe 150 max came to the drag queen event. So we actually
Wow.
outnumbered them protesters to people for the event. So that's already happening. But that's still not enough to get the mayor to stop the event. And so what we really need a lot of times is to be able to take this into the political sphere and use the pressure that's been built up there and say, look, if you're going to continue to allow this to be hosted in our city, this is your last term of office.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I could definitely see 500 people coming out next time if this
Wow.
were to continue.
Yeah, and hopefully it doesn't. It's
Yeah.
are you taking, or are you going to take legal action against the city or against the police force for how they treated you?
Yeah, they still have those charges against me right
Yeah.
now. So
And what were the charges?
amplification without a permit, or
Yeah.
actually music amplification without a permit,
And then
which is
resisting arrest.
$200 fine, and then resisting arrest is about $500 fine.
Yeah.
So I want to get those dropped, and then from there we'll probably talk to some legal counsel about further steps we could take. People have mentioned suing those officers. I'm actually not quite sure about that myself, because really, if we were going to take further legal action, what I want to direct a lot of this at would be the chief of the police, the mayor, the organizers of the event. I'm not in this fight so that I can be personally vindicated. Yeah, I was
Right.
arrested. Yeah, it was an unjust arrest. No, those officers shouldn't be allowed to continue to do that in the future. But what I really want to happen is to see, hey, next year, dozens of little children aren't going to have grown men dancing in front of them and twerking in front of them.
Right.
Yeah.
Man, that's good. I think you're on a good path. It's encouraging to see that a young man is doing this kind of thing and fighting these battles. And I think they should be fought. And it's even encouraging that you haven't gotten pushback, because especially if you're online a lot like me, you get the obnoxious people, just the people arguing online, the keyboard warriors who aren't actually going out and doing anything on their own. And
Right.
but it's encouraging when you actually are out there in the field to
Mhm.
see the kind of encouragement that you're getting, and hopefully what you're doing, and I want this to be an encouragement to other people to say, like, hey, go out and do what you're doing. Go do protests at these awful events, because they actually are evil. And I think, like you said earlier, the way that this bad stuff gets perpetuated is when good men do nothing, or when people don't vote, or when people don't go show their physical support, or disapproval of these events personally. So hopefully that will, your event, at least in this town, and hopefully more broadly as the story gets spread, be an encouragement to people so that they actually get up and go and fight for good. And when they actually convert people to Christianity, those people are going to live faithfully. And when people come to Christ and they live faithfully, their family is going to be Christian, their government is going to be Christian. And so Christian nationalism, if you're a consistent Christian, is inevitable. And I think just because a lot of people are afraid of that term, or, oh, we don't want to look bad, we don't want to be a bad witness because the leftists are accusing me of this. What doesn't matter what they call you. What matters is that you're faithful, and that you're faithfully preaching the gospel, and that you're faithfully converting people to Christ and making them stop the evil junk that they're doing. And like what you were doing, protecting children.
Yeah, for sure.
And the Warriors for Christ, is that something through your school, your church, or what is Warriors for Christ?
Yeah, it's a local group. It was really birthed out of my church. There's a lot of young people in my church, mostly because everybody in my church has a lot of kids. So there are a lot of young people my age in the church who go out and do that kind of ministry. And so it probably started with like 15 to 20 of us from this church, Mercy Seat. There's probably at least 40 to 50 of us now, and it's expanded. We're now, it's a coalition of, young people from many different churches in the area. So we probably have 8 or 9 different churches that are connected with this. I've had meetings with different pastors who are getting excited about this, who are wanting to get involved. And so, we host different events. So we go out to these meetings, these drag queen story hours, and preach the gospel there. We also are engaged with some political connections. I've spoken at different political meetings, hearings, and that's gave me some friendships there. And so we actually have an assemblyman in the Wisconsin legislature right now working on a bill to explicitly criminalize drag queen story hours or any pride event that is held with minors present. And I think he's kind of forming it after some of what Texas just passed. I don't think it's going to be the exact same, but something along those lines where it criminalizes those kind of events if you're going to have minors present, which I think is a good step forward. And so we have some of those political things we work on too. We host a conference once a year where we kind of like the Operation Save America kind of style, only it's local. And so, we'll do those trainings, then we'll go out in the streets, that kind of thing. And then September 9th, actually, we've got an event coming up where we're going to do a training session in the evening, have like TED Talk style, where like 20 minutes a speaker, 6 speakers in the night, and do apologetics trainings, talk about why we need to be engaged culturally. And then we're going to have like 3 younger people start off the first session with like some of the passion, the zeal, why we need to be engaged. And then 3 older people kind of close it off with, here's some of the practical ways to actually get engaged in regards to the education system. We're going to have a former public school teacher who was actually fired for misgendering one of his students. He's going to be there. We're going to have a couple of my pastors there talking about apologetics, talking about the doctrine of the lesser magistrate, working at the county level to kind of reform things. And then we're going to do some training sessions and prayer and worship. And so those are some of the other things that we've got going on too, more than just on the streets evangelism, but yeah, so that's kind of the look of our group right now. And it's definitely been expanding and growing.
Man, that's awesome. It's awesome you're doing that. And I think that stuff is very much needed in our churches and in our nation as a whole. Apologetics and preaching and recovering these old doctrines that we've lost, like the doctrine of the lesser magistrate. That's amazing stuff. So go support Marcus's YouTube channel, the Warriors for Christ, right?
Warriors for Christ Studios. Okay. And the podcast, Warriors for Christ podcast? Yes. Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Well, thanks, Marcus, for coming on.
All right. Thank you for having me.